For 2,500 years, this principle was embedded in a story everyone knows and almost nobody understood. Every culture told it, every generation passed it down, and every generation missed the real lesson. The story of Midas was never about gold. It was about the one rule that separates the people who build wealth from the people who lose everything trying to. Most people think going broke means not having enough money. That is the wrong diagnosis. People go broke having plenty of money, chasing the wrong thing with the wrong sequence. The ancient world knew this. They encoded the answer inside the most famous gold story ever told, and then watched for 2,500 years as generation after generation repeated the same mistake. The secret was not hidden because it was complicated. It was hidden because it contradicts everything the world tells you to do. And that contradiction is exactly why most people never find it. By the end of this teaching, you will understand the single principle that protects wealth before it builds wealth. The sequence Midas violated and Croesus ignored, and the reason the ancient Greeks considered it the foundation of every lasting fortune. A prayer for financial protection and wisdom awaits you at the close. Here is the great deception of personal finance in the modern world. The world tells you that the path to wealth is simple. Earn more, invest more, accumulate more. The world is giving you a map with the destination marked correctly and every road wrong, because the world skips the step that comes first. It skips the step that every ancient civilization, every lasting dynasty, every financial philosophy that survived more than one generation placed before everything else. This is not about earning. This is about surviving long enough to earn. The trap is not poverty. The trap is fragility. You can be generating income, holding assets, watching numbers climb on a screen, and be one crisis, one liquidity shock, one sequence of bad timing away from losing the entire structure. That is not a theory. That is the financial biography of the vast majority of people who were once, by every visible measure, doing well. They had income, they had assets, they had plans, and then one variable shifted, and the whole thing came apart, not because they were unlucky, but because they had built exposure when they believed they were building wealth. Here is the diagnosis, and it is brutal. Most people build their financial life the way someone stacks plates higher and higher, impressive to look at, devastating when anything shifts. They are not building wealth, they are building exposure. And the moment the conditions change, the moment the market turns, the job disappears, the medical bill arrives, the real estate deal collapses, the entire structure comes down because it was never protected. It was only accumulated. The world tells you to focus on the upside. The world is giving you half a compass, and a half compass will get you lost in ways that a broken compass never could, because at least a broken compass you distrust. The half compass you follow with confidence, right into the terrain that destroys you. The ancient principle hidden in the story of Midas is this: protection is not the enemy of growth. Protection is the prerequisite of growth. And every person who has ever built wealth that lasted understood this, even if they did not name it the way the Greeks named it. The sequence is not protection or growth. The sequence is protection, then growth. In that order, without exception. The ancient world encoded this not as philosophy but as warning, a story of a king who received everything he asked for and nearly died because he had asked for the wrong thing in the wrong sequence. Midas did not fail because he wanted gold. He failed because he wanted gold without understanding what gold could not do. He received the power to turn everything he touched into gold, and the moment that power was activated, he discovered that a man surrounded by gold can still starve. He could not eat. He could not drink. He could not hold the people he loved. The asset he had pursued with everything he had became the very thing that made his life unlivable. This is not a fairy tale about greed as a moral failing. This is a precise financial lesson about liquidity, sequencing, and the difference between having and being able to use what you have. Notice what Ovid records in the Metamorphoses, Book 11. When Midas realizes his error, he does not double down. He does not find a way to make the gold more useful. He does not look for a smarter strategy to work within his new reality. He goes back to Dionysus and begs to be released from the very gift he had prayed for. And Dionysus gives him a specific instruction. Go to the river Pactolus, wash your hands in the headwaters, and let the river carry the curse away. Notice the word wash, not invest, not convert, not leverage. Wash, release, reset. The cure for the Midas trap is not more strategy. It is the willingness to let go of the thing you thought would save you and return to what actually sustains life. The river Pactolus is not incidental to this story. Herodotus documents it as the historical source of gold alluvium that funded the early Lydian kingdom, the gold that made Croesus, the king whose name became synonymous with wealth in the ancient world, the richest ruler the ancient Mediterranean had ever seen. The same river that cured Midas became the foundation of the greatest fortune of that era. That is not coincidence. That is the encoded message. The moment Midas released his grip on the unlivable form of wealth and let the river carry it in a form that could actually flow, the river itself became generative. Flowing gold, accessible gold, gold that could be used, traded, exchanged, built upon. The Lydians did not hoard it. They coined it. They put it into motion. And that decision to prioritize the liquid and usable form of wealth over the static and impressive form is what built the most powerful kingdom in the pre-Persian Mediterranean. The ancient world understood something that the modern financial conversation consistently fails to teach. Wealth that cannot move is not wealth. It is a trap with a golden door. Now consider the man who inherited that river's legacy. Croesus of Lydia. Herodotus describes him in the histories as the king who first reduced Greeks to the paying of tribute that is a specific measure of power, not merely wealth. He possessed treasure that ancient records describe as unmatched in the Mediterranean world. He had gold, he had armies, he had alliances and advisors, and the accumulated advantages of a dynasty built on the wealthiest geological accident in the ancient world. And he had a conversation with Solon of Athens, one of the 7 sages of Greece, that should have changed the trajectory of everything and did not. Solon visited Croesus in Sardis. Croesus showed him the treasury, the storehouses, the weapons, the organized power of a kingdom built on centuries of accumulated wealth. And then he asked Solon directly, "Of all the men you have known in your travels, who is the happiest?" He expected Solon to name him. Solon named 2 ordinary Athenians, men who had lived fully, served their city, and died well. And when Croesus pushed back, "Surely I, with all of this, with more wealth than any man alive, must rank among the most fortunate," Solon said something that Herodotus preserved with precision in histories. Book 1, Chapter 32. Call no man happy until he is dead. Most people hear that as philosophical caution about the unpredictability of fate. It is financial architecture. What Solon was telling Croesus was exactly this. The measure of a fortune is not its peak, it is its durability. A man who reaches extraordinary height and then loses everything has not been fortunate. He has been exposed. The true measure of wealth is not what it looks like at its maximum. It is whether it survives the test, whether it holds, whether it protects the life built around it when the conditions turn against it. And the conditions always turn. That is not pessimism. That is the one constant in the financial history of every civilization that has ever existed. Croesus did not listen. He consulted an oracle about whether to go to war against Cyrus of Persia. The oracle told him that if he crossed the river Halys, he would destroy a great empire. He assumed the empire to be destroyed was Persia. It was his own. He went to war without adequate protection of his existing position, misread the intelligence, overestimated his strength, and lost his kingdom in a campaign he was certain he would win. The richest ruler the ancient world had seen, destroyed not by poverty but by fragility, by the failure to protect what he had before he pursued what he wanted next. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this ancient wisdom is traveling across the world. Here is the first principle. Midas discovered the hard way. Protection must precede growth in the sequence of financial decisions. Not alongside it, not after it is established, before it. The moment you decide to grow, you must first decide what you are protecting the growth from. Here is where most people fail entirely. They treat protection as the thing they will get to eventually. Once the income stabilizes, once the investment matures, once the business reaches the next level. Once the kids are older, once the mortgage is lower, once the timing is better, protection gets scheduled for the future, and the future never quite arrives, because growth without a protected base is always one event away from collapse. The event does not need to be catastrophic. It only needs to arrive before the protection does. Benjamin Graham spent his entire career watching this pattern destroy otherwise intelligent investors. He built his life's work around a concept he called the margin of safety. And notice what the word safety precedes in that phrase. It precedes the word margin. The protection comes first. The profit calculation comes after the protection is established. Graham watched the Great Depression erase fortunes that had looked impenetrable, held by men who were certain that conditions would not change, that their analysis was sound, that the fundamentals were strong enough to absorb whatever came. What survived was not the most aggressive position. What survived was the most protected position. The investor, who had built in enough protection to absorb the downside, was still standing when the recovery arrived. The investor who had not, was not. His instruction was not conservative in the way people use that word to mean cautious or timid. It was precise. Never enter a position without first calculating the maximum loss you can absorb, without destroying the structure below it. That is not fear. That is architecture. The Midas principle in modern financial language: before you touch the gold, make sure you can still eat. Ask yourself this, honestly. If your primary income stopped today completely, without warning or severance, how many days could you sustain your current life without touching a single investment, without selling a single asset, without asking anyone for help? Write down that number. If it is smaller than 90, you do not yet have a protected base. You have exposure dressed up as progress. You have the appearance of stability with the underlying structure of a stack of plates. Here is the second principle. Illiquidity is the invisible trap. You can hold real wealth and still be destroyed by the inability to reach it when you need it. Here is where the trap becomes invisible. Midas had the greatest asset concentration in the room at every moment after the gift was granted. He had more gold than any man alive, and he was starving. This is not mythology requiring interpretation. This is the precise financial condition of people who hold their net worth locked in real estate. They cannot sell in less than 6 months without catastrophic loss, in retirement accounts with early withdrawal penalties that make access prohibitively expensive, in equity tied to a business with no immediate buyer at any reasonable valuation, in investment positions that require a year or more to exit without destroying the price they receive. On paper, those people are wealthy. In a crisis that arrives before the assets can be liquidated, they are paralyzed. The wealth is real. The access is not. The ancient Lydians understood the value of convertibility at a level that shaped the entire structure of Mediterranean commerce. Herodotus records that the Lydians were the first people to coin money to take the electrum, the natural alloy of gold and silver that came from the Pactolus, and stamp it into standardized, portable pieces that could move across borders, change hands immediately, fund a transaction today, without negotiation, without weighing, without verification. They took the gold from the river and made it usable. They invented liquidity. That was the innovation that made the Lydian kingdom the financial center of the ancient world, not the gold. The accessibility of the gold, the ability to act without first arranging the conditions for acting. Charlie Munger observed this dynamic across decades of watching wealth built and then destroyed. His instruction on financial thinking was consistent and direct. Invert, always invert. Do not ask only what can grow. Ask first what can kill you, and then eliminate that threat before you pursue the growth. What kills most financial structures is not a bad investment in isolation. It is a bad investment that occurs at the exact moment that liquidity runs out. When you cannot meet an immediate obligation because everything you hold is tied up in a long position, the long position does not rescue you. It becomes the thing you are forced to liquidate at the worst possible moment, at the worst possible price, under the worst possible conditions, to cover an emergency that a liquid reserve of even modest size would have made entirely survivable. The question is not whether you have assets. The question is whether your assets can move when you need them to move. Can you act today without first executing a transaction that takes 60 days to settle? If not, you are holding Midas gold, visually impressive, potentially enormous in value, and completely useless in the crisis that arrives before the transaction clears. Here is the third principle. The margin of safety is not pessimism. It is the mathematical acknowledgement that the future will not arrive exactly as planned, and that the gap between the plan and reality is where most financial destruction occurs. Consider what this means in your actual situation. Every financial plan you have made assumes a version of the future. The income continues at its current level or grows. The investment generates returns within a projected range. The expenses stay within the budget. The market cooperates with the timeline. The health holds. The job is stable. The plan is built on a sequence of assumptions that feel reasonable because they are based on current conditions, and current conditions change. They change with regularity, without warning, and without regard for the quality of your planning. The margin of safety does not exist because you expect disaster. It exists because you have the honesty to acknowledge that expecting things to go exactly as planned is not optimism. It is the very thing that leaves you with no room to recover when reality deviates from the plan. And reality always deviates. The only question is whether the deviation is survivable. Benjamin Graham made this precise. The function of the margin of safety is, in essence, that of rendering unnecessary an accurate estimate of the future. Notice what he is saying. The margin of safety does not help you predict better. It makes prediction less critical. It is the structure that makes being wrong survivable. You do not need to see the crisis coming. You need to have protected enough that when it arrives, you are still standing when it passes. The person with the margin of safety does not need to time the market, call the turn, or anticipate the variable that changes everything. They need to have built enough protection that the unexpected does not end the story. Sir John Templeton built generational wealth from a position of relative disadvantage and maintained it across conditions that destroyed most of his contemporaries. His observation about the financial behavior that accelerates destruction was sharp and specific. The four most dangerous words in investing, he said, are, "This time it's different," and they are dangerous for a precise reason. They are the words people use to justify removing the margin of safety. This time the market is structurally different, so full exposure is rational. This time the income source is uniquely secure, so the reserve is unnecessary. This time the asset class is new enough that historical patterns do not apply. Every financial collapse of consequence has been preceded by this reasoning, stated confidently by intelligent people who were certain they understood why the old rules did not apply to their situation. The margin of safety is the structural commitment to refuse that reasoning, regardless of how compelling the argument for it becomes. Here is the fourth principle. Before you commit the capital, invert the question. Ask what destroys you before you ask what rewards you. Stop and ask yourself something honest right now. Before every significant financial decision you have made, the investment, the major purchase, the business commitment, the expansion into something new, what was the first question you asked? For most people, the first question is about the upside. How much can I gain? How fast does this grow? What is the return on this position? What is the upside scenario if this works? These are not wrong questions. They are incomplete questions asked in the wrong order. The ancient principle requires a different first question. What is the worst realistic outcome here, and can I survive it without collapsing the structure that already exists? Not the catastrophic nightmare scenario. The realistic downside, the thing that has happened to similar people in similar situations when conditions turned against them. Can you absorb that outcome without destroying the floor beneath it? Midas did not ask what happens if he cannot eat. He asked only what it would feel like to have unlimited gold. Croesus did not ask what happens if the oracle was ambiguous, and Cyrus is stronger than any previous opponent. He asked only how far his armies could advance. Both men had the resources and the intelligence to have asked the second question. Neither did. Both were destroyed by the answer they chose not to examine. The question you do not ask is always the one that costs you everything. This inversion is not natural. The human mind is wired to move toward the reward and minimize the threat in its thinking. That wiring serves certain purposes. In financial architecture, it destroys you systematically and predictably. The builder who lasts is not the one who is most optimistic about the upside. The builder who lasts is the one who holds the downside scenario with the same clarity as the upside potential, and who will not proceed until the downside has been examined, priced, and accepted as survivable. If this teaching is shifting something in your understanding, if you can see now that there is a different way to build, tap the like button right now. It helps this message reach the people who need it most. And if you want more of the wisdom the Midas Code contains, subscribe to this channel. There is much more coming. Practical application begins with knowing exactly where you stand before you move another dollar in any direction. Step 1. Audit your liquidity position this week, not your net worth. Not your investment portfolio balance, your actual liquidity. Write down every asset you hold, and next to each one, write a single number. How many days would it take to convert this specific asset to usable cash without a catastrophic loss in value? Be honest with that number. The retirement account with the early withdrawal penalty, the real estate, the equity position in the private company, the investment with the lockup period, write the real conversion timeline, not the optimistic scenario. Then calculate how many days of your current expenses your immediately accessible cash can cover without touching any of those assets. That number is your actual financial position today. Everything else is potential, and potential does not pay the emergency that arrives before the conversion completes. Step 2. Establish your protection number before you establish your growth number. Before you decide how much to invest next month, decide the minimum liquid reserve you will hold without exception, regardless of what opportunity presents itself. This is not a savings goal that you work toward. It is a structural floor that you establish and defend. The ancient Lydians did not spend every coin that flowed from the Pactolus. They maintained enough in circulation to operate the kingdom while simultaneously building the treasury. Your protection number is your operational floor, the amount below which you will not allow your liquid position to fall, regardless of the investment that promises extraordinary returns if you move now. Step 3. Apply the margin of safety to every new financial commitment before you make it. Before you sign the contract, take on the debt, commit to the investment, or make the purchase run the inversion. What is the worst realistic outcome for this specific decision? Can you meet that outcome without destroying the structure beneath it? If the realistic downside of this commitment would require you to breach your protection floor, the margin of safety is insufficient. Either resize the commitment until the math works, or do not make the commitment until the structure is strong enough to absorb it. Step 4. Identify your single greatest illiquidity exposure and build a conversion plan for it now. You likely have one asset or commitment that, if you needed to access its value quickly, would result in significant loss or take far too long to be useful in a real emergency. That is your Midas gold. It may be genuinely valuable. It may be the most important asset in your structure, but its illiquidity is a risk that needs a plan, not just an acknowledgement. You do not need to exit it today. You need a realistic timeline, a price threshold at which you would begin a conversion process, and a trigger condition under which that plan activates. The Lydians did not leave the alluvium sitting in the riverbed. They built the infrastructure to move it. Build your infrastructure before the crisis requires you to improvise it. Step 5. Protect before you pursue the next level. Every time you reach a new income level, a new asset level, a new stage of financial growth, before you deploy that growth into the next opportunity, stop and verify that the current structure is protected at its new size. Have you reinforced the floor before you began building the next floor above it? The consistent tendency is to roll every gain immediately into the next pursuit. The ancient principle is to stop at each level, confirm that what has been built can survive an interruption, and only then extend upward. This is not slow. This is the sequencing that produces durability across decades instead of spectacular accumulation followed by spectacular collapse. Step 6. Review the sequence every 90 days, not annually. Every 90 days, your liquidity position has changed. Your exposure has changed. The margin of safety that was sufficient at the start of the quarter may be insufficient today because the structure grew without the protection growing alongside it. Put a 90-day review on your calendar from today, not from next month when things settle down. From today. The ancient world maintained its gold not by checking once a year and assuming everything held. It maintained it by keeping constant awareness of what was flowing, what was held, and what the structure could absorb. This is not complicated. This is ancient wisdom rewritten in the language your situation requires. If you have been watching this channel, and you know that what is taught here is different from what you hear everywhere else, subscribe right now. Tap the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you do not miss what comes next. What comes next will go even deeper into the financial principles encoded in the ancient code. The principles around debt as a weapon turned against the borrower, around passive income built on the right foundation versus the wrong one, around the trap that destroys people who earn exceptionally well, but build nothing that outlasts their income. All of it is coming. Subscribe now and you will be notified every time a new lesson is released. And if this teaching gave you something real today, share it with one person you believe needs to hear it. Not 10 people. One. The right one. That is how ancient wisdom was always meant to travel person to person, truth to truth, one shifted understanding at a time. Before we close, I want to invite you into something different. This prayer is not a formality. It is an alignment. Close your eyes if you can, or simply align your thoughts with mine right now. What comes next is not just words. It is an invitation. Father, we come before you with honesty about what we have been doing and what we now understand must change. We confess that we have pursued growth without protection. We have chased the next level without securing the one we were standing on. We have allowed the excitement of accumulation to silence the wisdom of preservation. We have held assets we could not use when we needed them, made commitments we could not sustain under pressure, and called ourselves financially stable while remaining structurally fragile. We were reaching for gold and forgetting to protect our ability to live. We ask you today for the wisdom to sequence rightly, for the discipline to protect before we pursue, to establish the floor before we build the ceiling, to hold the margin of safety as a structural principle and not merely a temporary posture we abandon when the opportunity looks compelling enough. Give us the clarity to audit honestly, to look at what we actually hold, not what we believe we hold in theory, and to see where the fragility lives before the crisis reveals it for us. We ask for release from the Midas trap, from the belief that more accumulation is always the right answer, from the compulsion to deploy every gain into the next pursuit before pausing to ask whether what we have built can survive what is coming. Give us the courage to let go of the form of wealth that looks powerful but leaves us unable to act when action is required, and to return to the flowing kind, liquid, accessible, real, the kind that serves the life it was meant to protect. We declare that we are not slaves to accumulation. We are stewards of what flows through us. We declare that protection is not timidity. It is wisdom. We declare that the margin of safety is not the enemy of abundance. It is the architecture of abundance that endures beyond a single favorable season. Provide clarity over our financial structure this week. Provide discernment over every commitment that seeks our resources before our protection is in place. Provide the strength to say no to the opportunity that looks golden but would leave us exposed. And provide the gratitude to recognize that what we already have, properly protected and wisely sequenced, is sufficient to build something that lasts far beyond us. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Go in peace. The gold that flows is worth infinitely more than the gold that freezes everything it touches. You are free.